The flask in my desk drawer contained better scotch than anything they served at the company Christmas party, and I was the only data analyst who brought one without being the saddest man in the room. That distinction belonged to Jerry from accounting, who'd been wearing the same tie since Halloween and kept muttering about his ex-wife's alimony payments. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Owen Harcourt, 38 years old, and I've spent the last 6 years crunching numbers for Drayton Industries while my wife, Leah, climbed the corporate ladder with the grace of a piranha in Louboutin. She'd made CEO 3 months ago, inheriting the position from her father Barry like some twisted fairy tale where the princess gets the kingdom and the peasant husband gets to watch from the sidelines. Owen, darling, could you grab me another champagne? Leah's voice cut through the holiday muzak like a blade wrapped in silk. She stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Miami headquarters, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the December humidity outside. Next to her stood Brent Wilder, our marketing director, whose gym-sculpted frame filled out his designer suit like he was auditioning for a cologne commercial. Of course, sweetheart, I replied, though the endearment tasted like ash in my mouth. As I walked toward the bar, I caught fragments of their conversation. The quarterly projections look fantastic, Leah. Your vision is really paying off, Brent was saying, his voice dripping with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for lottery winners or cult members. Well, I do appreciate having team members who actually listen to my ideas, Leah responded, her eyes finding mine across the room. It makes such a difference when people are receptive to leadership. The barb hit its mark. 2 weeks ago, I'd questioned her decision to cut the research and development budget by 40%. Not publicly, not dramatically. Just a quiet conversation in her office where I'd presented data showing how similar cuts had damaged our competitors. Her response had been swift and surgical. Brent actually listens, Owen. You might try it sometime. I handed her the champagne, noting how Brent's fingers brushed hers as she took it. Their wedding rings caught the light differently, his newer, shinier, like everything else about him. Thank you, honey. Brent was just telling me about his ideas for the spring marketing campaign. So innovative. She smiled at him with genuine warmth, the kind she used to reserve for me back when we were dating, back when I was pursuing my MBA, and she was impressed by my analytical mind rather than threatened by it. Sounds exciting, I said, taking a sip from my own drink. The scotch burned, but not as much as watching my wife flirt with another man at our company Christmas party. What's the innovative angle? Brent straightened, clearly pleased to have an audience. We're thinking about repositioning the brand toward younger demographics. More social media presence, influencer partnerships, that sort of thing. Really shake up the traditional approach. I nodded slowly. Interesting. Have you run any cost-benefit analyses on influencer marketing for our sector? The data I've seen suggests the ROI can be pretty volatile, especially for B2B services. The enthusiasm in Brent's eyes dimmed slightly. Well, we're still in the conceptual phase. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts, you know? Of course, I agreed. Though in my experience, instincts work better when they're backed up by solid numbers. But I'm sure you'll figure it out. Leah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Owen's always been very thorough with his analysis, sometimes to a fault. She turned to Brent with renewed brightness. But that's why we have visionaries like you to balance out the bean counters. Bean counter. 6 years of marriage, and that's what I'd become in her eyes. Not a strategic analyst, not a financial expert, a bean counter. I finished my drink and excused myself, claiming I needed to check on something in my office. The executive floor was mostly empty, just the soft hum of computers and the distant sound of the party 20 floors below. I settled into my chair and pulled up the quarterly reports, losing myself in spreadsheets and data models. Numbers didn't lie, didn't manipulate, didn't make you feel small while smiling sweetly. Around midnight, I heard voices in the hallway, Leah's laugh, bright and genuine, followed by Brent's deeper chuckle. I minimized my screen and listened as they passed my office. So glad we can finally work together without all the politics, Brent was saying. It's refreshing, isn't it? Having someone who understands the big picture. Leah's voice was softer now, more intimate. I've been feeling so isolated lately, especially at home. Owen's been so negative about everything I'm trying to accomplish. They stopped walking. Through my partially open door, I could see them standing near the elevator bank. Brent reached out and touched her arm. You deserve better than that, Leah. You're brilliant, you're beautiful, and you're running this company better than it's ever been run. Anyone who can't see that is probably threatened by strong women, Leah finished. God, it feels good to have someone who gets it. The elevator arrived with a soft ding, and their voices faded as they descended together. I sat in my dark office, staring at the Miami skyline and wondering when exactly my marriage had become a business merger where I was the company being liquidated. Over the next few weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Brent's gym bag appeared in Leah's office with increasing frequency. Their strategy sessions ran later and later. The office gossip mill, usually focused on quarterly earnings and vacation schedules, shifted to whispered conversations that stopped whenever I approached. Nina, Leah's secretary, had always been friendly with me, but now she avoided eye contact and busied herself with paperwork whenever I came by. Ms. Patel from HR, normally chatty about her daughter's college applications, became professionally distant. Even Tariq, my friend from IT, who usually joined me for lunch, started making excuses about being too busy. The isolation was methodical, surgical. Projects I'd been leading for months were suddenly reassigned to other departments. My access to certain financial databases was quietly revoked. When I asked Leah about it over dinner at our Coral Gables home, she barely looked up from her tablet. "It's just restructuring, Owen. We need to streamline operations." She was scrolling through emails, her wine glass balanced precariously on the arm of our leather sofa. "Besides, maybe it's time you focused on your core competencies instead of trying to expand into areas where you don't have expertise." "Core competencies?" I set down my fork, my appetite disappearing. "Leah, I've been doing strategic analysis for 6 years. I have an MBA from Wharton. What exactly do you think my core competencies are?" She finally looked at me, her expression patient in the way you'd look at a child asking why the sky is blue. "Data entry, Owen. Report generation. The foundational work that keeps the company running. It's important work. Data entry." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Is that really what you think I do?" "I think you do what you're good at," she replied, returning to her tablet. "And lately, what you're good at doesn't seem to include supporting your wife's career." I excused myself and went for a walk along the canal behind our house. The Florida night was warm and humid, filled with the sound of insects and the distant hum of traffic. When I returned an hour later, Leah was on the phone in her study, door closed, voice low and intimate. "I know, it's complicated. But we have to be careful?" "Yes, I want that too." I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. Through the thin walls, I could hear her laugh at something the person on the other end said. It was the same laugh I'd heard in the hallway that night after the Christmas party. The next morning, I arrived at the office early and found Tariq in the server room, running diagnostics on the email system. "Hey, stranger," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Haven't seen you around much lately." Tariq looked uncomfortable, his dark eyes darting away from mine. "Yeah, been swamped with the network upgrade. You know how it is?" "Actually, I don't. Nobody tells me anything anymore." I leaned against the door frame, blocking his exit. "Tariq, we've been friends for 4 years. What's going on?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the server rack. Finally, he sighed. "Look, Owen, I like you. You're a good guy, but... But Leah's the CEO now, and Brent's got her ear. Word is, anyone who's too friendly with you might find themselves looking for new jobs." He met my eyes apologetically. "I've got 2 kids and a mortgage, man. I can't afford to be on the wrong side of this." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This isn't about restructuring or core competencies. They're freezing me out. "I'm sorry," Tariq said quietly. "For what it's worth, everyone knows you're getting screwed, but knowing and doing something about it are different things." I nodded, understanding flooding through me like ice water. "Thanks for being honest. Owen," he called as I turned to leave, "be careful. Brent's been asking IT to monitor certain email accounts. Yours included." I spent the rest of the day in my office, ostensibly working on quarterly projections, but actually thinking. By 5 o'clock, when the office began to empty, I had the beginnings of a plan. Not revenge, not yet, but reconnaissance. If they wanted to play corporate politics, I needed to understand the rules of their game. That evening, Leah worked late again. I made dinner for one and ate it while reading through my employment contract, my stock options, and our prenuptial agreement. The prenup was ironclad. Leah's father had insisted on it, and I'd been too in love to care. But employment law was different. If I was being constructively dismissed, there were protections. If there was misconduct involved, there were whistleblower provisions. Around 10 p.m., Leah came home, her cheeks flushed and her lipstick slightly smeared. "Sorry, honey, the board meeting ran long," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I grabbed dinner with the team afterward." "Which team members?" I asked casually, not looking up from my laptop. "Oh, the usual suspects. Brent, Sarah from legal, a couple others." She headed toward the stairs. "I'm exhausted. Don't wait up." I waited until I heard the shower running, then opened her laptop, which she'd left on the kitchen counter. Her email was still logged in, and it took me less than 30 seconds to find what I was looking for. The message thread with Brent went back 3 months. It started professional enough. Meeting requests, project updates, budget discussions. But by mid-November, the tone had shifted. Looking forward to our dinner meeting tomorrow, just the two of us this time. We can speak more freely about the strategic initiatives. The presentation went perfectly. You were right about keeping Owen out of the loop. He would have just complicated things with his endless questions. Can't stop thinking about last night. When can we meet again? The most recent message was from this afternoon. Tell your husband you're working late again. I've made reservations at that place in South Beach. Wear the red dress. I closed the laptop and sat in our kitchen, surrounded by the life we'd built together. The granite countertops we'd picked out, the wedding photos on the refrigerator, the coffee maker that had been a housewarming gift for my parents. All of it felt suddenly foreign, like props in a play I hadn't auditioned for. The shower was still running upstairs. I opened my own laptop and began to type. The next few days passed in a strange haze of normalcy. Leah and I maintained our routine, coffee in the morning, perfunctory kisses goodbye, polite conversation over dinner. But underneath the surface, I was gathering intelligence like a spy in enemy territory. I started arriving at the office earlier and staying later, not because I had more work, but because I needed access to systems and information during off hours. My legitimate access had been curtailed, but 6 years of working in the same building had taught me things about security protocols and administrative passwords that IT probably wished I'd forgotten. Brent's expense reports made for particularly interesting reading. Company credit card charges at expensive restaurants, always for 2 people, always on evenings when Leah claimed to be working late. Hotel charges in Orlando and Tampa for marketing conferences that didn't exist. Spa treatments and shopping excursions that somehow qualified as a client entertainment. But the real goldmine was in the HR database. Complaint after complaint about Brent's behavior. Inappropriate comments to female employees, promises of promotions in exchange for flexibility, and a pattern of targeting anyone who questioned his methods or qualifications. All of it buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy and legal settlements with non-disclosure agreements. Ms. Patel, I realized, hadn't been avoiding me out of loyalty to Leah. She'd been avoiding me because she knew what was happening and felt powerless to stop it. The HR department reported to the CEO, and the CEO was sleeping with the subject of multiple harassment complaints. On Thursday evening, I was alone in the office when I heard the elevator ding. Voices in the hallway, Leah and Brent returning from another client dinner. I minimized my screen and listened as they approached. Have to do something about Owen, Brent was saying. He's been asking too many questions, poking around where he doesn't belong. I know, Leah replied. But we have to be smart about it. He's my husband, and Barry still likes him. If we move too fast, it could raise suspicions. They stopped outside my office. Through the frosted glass, I could see their silhouettes. What if we make it his choice? Brent suggested. Create a situation where he either falls in line or removes himself from the equation. How? Simple. We make his life here so miserable that he quits. Cut his salary, demote him, make it clear that his career here is over unless he plays ball. Most guys would take the hint. Leah was quiet for a moment. And if he doesn't take the hint? Then we manufacture a reason to fire him. Performance issues, insubordination, whatever. I've got friends in HR who owe me favors. I heard the soft sound of kissing, then Brent's voice, lower and more intimate. Don't worry, baby. This time next year, you'll be free to be with whoever you want, and I'll be running this company the way it should be run. Promise me, Leah whispered. Promise me we won't have to keep sneaking around much longer. I promise. Owen's going to be history, one way or another. Their footsteps faded toward the elevator. I sat in my dark office, hands shaking slightly as I saved the audio recording I'd been making on my phone. The conversation had been muffled through the glass, but it was clear enough to understand their intentions. They wanted me gone, not just marginalized or demoted, completely removed from the picture, and they were willing to destroy my career and reputation to make it happen. I looked out at the Miami skyline, the lights reflecting off Biscayne Bay like scattered diamonds. For the first time in months, I smiled. They thought they were playing chess while I was playing checkers. They had no idea I'd been playing an entirely different game. The next morning, I called in sick and spent the day in a lawyer's office in downtown Miami. David Chen, no relation to anyone at the company, specialized in employment law and corporate whistleblowing. He was a thin, precise man who listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. You have documentation of all this? He asked when I finished. I handed him a flash drive. Expense reports, HR complaints, email threads, recorded conversations, everything. He plugged the drive into his computer and spent 20 minutes reviewing the files. When he looked up, his expression was grim. "Mr. Harcourt, what you've uncovered here goes beyond simple adultery or workplace favoritism. This is systematic harassment, misuse of company funds, and potentially criminal conspiracy. Your wife and her lover have created a hostile work environment and are planning to terminate you under false pretenses." "What are my options?" "Several. You could file a complaint with the Department of Labor, sue for constructive dismissal, or report the financial irregularities to the SEC. Any of those would probably result in a settlement and some measure of justice." He paused. Or you could let them hang themselves. Give them enough rope, document everything, and then expose the whole conspiracy at once. It would be more dramatic, more complete, but also riskier. I thought about Leah's laugh in the hallway, about Brent's promises to make me history, about the way my colleagues had been turned against me through fear and manipulation. "I want them to hang themselves," I said. "What do I need to do?" David smiled for the first time since I'd entered his office. "First, we're going to make you untouchable. Then, we're going to give them exactly what they think they want." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Over the next 2 weeks, I would continue to gather evidence while appearing increasingly demoralized and isolated. David would prepare a comprehensive legal filing that documented every violation, every misuse of funds, every instance of harassment and conspiracy. But instead of filing it immediately, we would wait for them to make their move. "The key," David explained, "is to let them commit to a course of action they can't walk back from. Once they fire you or force you to quit, they'll have completed the conspiracy. That's when we strike." I returned to work the following Monday with a new sense of purpose. To my colleagues, I appeared defeated, shoulders slumped, responses monosyllabic, the fight seemingly gone out of me. But internally, I was more focused than I'd been in months. Leah and Brent, sensing weakness, began to press their advantage. My office was moved to a smaller space in the basement level. My parking spot was reassigned. Projects were taken away from me with increasing frequency, always with apologetic explanations about restructuring and efficiency. The final provocation came on a Friday afternoon in late January. I was called to Leah's office, where she sat behind her mahogany desk like a judge preparing to pass sentence. Brent lounged in one of the leather chairs, his posture casual, but his eyes alert. "Owen, we need to talk," Leah began, her voice professionally distant. "Your performance over the past few months has been concerning." I said nothing, just waited for her to continue. "You've seemed distracted, disengaged, almost hostile to new initiatives. Several department heads have mentioned that you're not the team player you used to be." "Which department heads?" I asked quietly. "That's not important," Brent interjected. "What's important is that we address this performance issue before it becomes a bigger problem." Leah nodded. "We're prepared to offer you a choice, Owen. You can accept a demotion to junior analyst, with the corresponding salary reduction, or you can tender your resignation. Either way, we need to see some changes." I looked at my wife, this woman I'd loved for 8 years, married for 6, and saw a stranger. The warmth that had once drawn me to her was gone, replaced by cold calculation and barely concealed contempt. "And if I refuse both options?" "Then we'll have to consider termination for cause," she replied. "Insubordination, failure to adapt to changing company needs, general performance deficiencies. It wouldn't look good on your resume." Brent leaned forward, his expression mockingly sympathetic. "Look, Owen, we're trying to help you here. Sometimes people just aren't cut out for the corporate world. There's no shame in admitting that." I stood up slowly, my mind crystal clear despite the rage building in my chest. "I need some time to think about this." "Of course," Leah said, her relief evident. "Take the weekend. Let us know your decision on Monday." As I reached the door, I turned back. Just out of curiosity, if I do resign, who would take over my current responsibilities? Leah and Brent exchanged a quick glance. "We'd probably distribute them among the existing team," she said. "Maybe bring in a consultant for the more specialized work." "A consultant like Brent's friend from his last company? The one who's been CC'd on all those strategy emails?" The silence that followed was deafening. Brent's face flushed red, and Leah's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "I think this conversation is over," she said coldly. I nodded and left, closing the door behind me with deliberate gentleness. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and sent a text message to David Chen. They took the bait. Time to set the hook. That weekend, I moved out of our Coral Gables house and into a furnished apartment in Brickell. I left no note, no explanation, just packed my clothes and personal items while Leah was at her Saturday morning Pilates class. By the time she returned, I was gone. Monday morning arrived gray and humid, typical for Miami in late January. I dressed carefully, my best suit, lucky tie, shoes polished to a mirror shine. If this was going to be my last day at Drayton Industries, I wanted to look like a man who belonged there. I arrived at the office at 7 a.m., 2 hours before my scheduled meeting with Leah. The executive floor was empty except for security and cleaning staff. I made my way to my old office, the one I'd occupied before my recent restructuring, and settled in to wait. At exactly 9 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a text from Leah. Conference room B, now. The conference room was full when I arrived. Leah sat at the head of the table, flanked by Brent and Ms. Patel from HR. Barry Drayton, Leah's father and chairman of the board, occupied the seat to her right, his weathered face impassive. Two people I didn't recognize, lawyers, judging by their identical black suits and briefcases, completed the tribunal. Please, sit down, Owen, Leah said, gesturing to the single chair facing the assembled group. I trust you've had time to consider our offer? I remained standing. I have. And? I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, placing it on the polished conference table with deliberate care. I decline both options. Instead, I'm filing formal complaints with the Department of Labor, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. The silence that followed was profound. Brent's face went white, then red, then white again. Ms. Patel looked like she was about to be sick. Even Barry Drayton, who'd seen every kind of corporate crisis in his 40-year career, appeared shaken. Leah was the first to recover. Owen, I think you're making a serious mistake. These are very serious accusations. They're not accusations, I interrupted, opening the envelope and spreading its contents across the table. They're documented facts. Expense reports showing systematic misuse of company funds. HR complaints that were buried or ignored. Email communications proving conspiracy to terminate an employee under false pretenses. Audio recordings of conversations planning my removal. I looked directly at Brent, whose gym-tanned face had gone ashen. Did you really think nobody would notice the spa treatments and jewelry purchases on your corporate card? Or that the hotel charges in cities where you had no business would go unquestioned forever? This is ridiculous, Brent stammered. Those were legitimate business expenses. For conferences that didn't exist? Client meetings with people who've never heard of you? Restaurant bills for 2 people when you claim to be dining alone? I smiled without warmth. I've been doing financial analysis for 6 years, Brent. I know how to read expense reports. Barry Drayton picked up one of the documents, his face growing darker as he read. Jesus Christ, Leah, is this true? Before she could answer, I continued. The financial irregularities are just the beginning. The real story is the systematic harassment and conspiracy to remove me from my position because I was inconvenient to your daughter's affair. Owen, stop, Leah said, her voice cracking. We can work this out. We don't need to air our personal problems. Personal problems? I laughed, the sound harsh in the sterile conference room. You turned my colleagues against me through intimidation and fear. You stripped away my responsibilities and access to make me appear incompetent. You planned to destroy my career and reputation to cover up your own misconduct. This stopped being personal the moment you made it corporate policy. Ms. Patel finally found her voice. The HR complaints. I wanted to investigate, but I was told. You were told to bury them, I finished. By the CEO, who was sleeping with the subject of those complaints. How many other employees have suffered because you chose to protect the company's image over their rights? The room erupted in voices, accusations, denials, demands for explanations. Through it all, I stood calmly, watching the careful facade of corporate respectability crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. Barry Drayton's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone shut up. The room fell silent. He looked at his daughter with disappointment and disgust. Leah, is what Owen is saying true? She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. No words came out. Brent tried to salvage the situation. Mr. Drayton, I think Owen is obviously upset about some personal issues with Leah, and he's trying to... I'm talking to my daughter, Barry snapped. Leah, answer me. Are you having an affair with this man? The silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Finally, Leah nodded, tears streaming down her face. And did you use your position as CEO to cover it up and retaliate against your husband? Another nod. Barry stood up, his chair scraping against the floor like fingernails on a chalkboard. You're both fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building within the hour. He turned to the lawyers. Draft whatever settlements and non-disclosure agreements you need to minimize our liability, and get our insurance company on the phone. We're going to need coverage for the lawsuits. Daddy, please, Leah started, but he held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. You've embarrassed this family and this company enough for one lifetime. He looked at me with something that might have been respect. Owen, I'm sorry for all of it. You deserved better from us. I nodded, accepting the apology that came 6 months too late. Thank you, Barry. As security arrived to escort Leah and Brent from the building, I gathered my documents and prepared to leave. My work here was done, but the satisfaction I'd expected to feel was tempered by sadness. This had been my life for 6 years. These people, my colleagues and friends. Even justified revenge came with a cost. Leah stopped at the conference room door and looked back at me. Owen, Goodbye, Leah, I said quietly. I hope it was worth it. She left without another word, and I never saw her again. The aftermath unfolded over the following months like a slow-motion explosion. The local business press picked up the story, then the national media. CEO fired for affair and corporate misconduct became a cautionary tale taught in business schools and ethics seminars. Brent's career in marketing was effectively over. No company would touch someone with his track record of harassment and financial impropriety. He moved back to his hometown in Ohio, and last I heard, was selling insurance and going through a messy divorce. Leah fared slightly better, at least financially. The divorce settlement was limited by our prenuptial agreement, but she retained her stock options and trust fund. She moved to California and started a consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. The irony wasn't lost on me. As for me, I took a position with a competing firm in New York, where my reputation as the man who'd exposed the Drayton Industries scandal made me something of a celebrity in corporate ethics circles. The salary was better, the work more challenging, and my new colleagues treated me with the respect I'd forgotten I deserved. On a cold February evening, almost exactly 1 year after that final confrontation in the conference room, I was working late in my Manhattan office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Owen Harcourt, I answered. Owen, it's Tariq. From Drayton? I leaned back in my chair, surprised. Tariq, how are you? How did you get this number? LinkedIn, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Listen, I wanted to call and thank you. Thank me for what? For what you did, for standing up to them. After you left, things changed around here. Barry brought in new management, cleaned house in HR, implemented real ethics policies. It's actually a decent place to work now. He paused. And I wanted to apologize. For not standing with you when you needed support. I was scared, and I let fear make me a coward. You had kids to think about, Tariq. I understood then, and I understand now. Maybe, but it wasn't right. You were a friend, and I abandoned you when things got tough. I'm sorry. We talked for another few minutes, catching up on mutual acquaintances and industry gossip. When I hung up, I realized that the conversation had given me something I hadn't expected. Closure. Not the dramatic, explosive kind I'd orchestrated in that conference room, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that my actions had made things better for people who deserved better. I returned to my work, analyzing quarterly projections for a client in the pharmaceutical industry. The numbers told a story of steady growth, smart investments, and ethical leadership. It was the kind of story I'd always wanted to be part of, the kind of story that made the long hours and difficult decisions worthwhile. Outside my window, New York City glittered in the darkness, full of ambition and possibility, and people fighting their own battles against systems that seemed designed to crush them. Some would win, some would lose, and some, like me, would discover that the real victory wasn't in destroying your enemies, but in refusing to let them destroy you. I smiled and got back to work. After all, the numbers didn't lie, and there was always another story waiting to be told.